Well, so you can tell I was having a hard time titling the message. Never did get it on the PowerPoint. So, facing your giants. Today we're going to be talking about battles that we face. They're just, we all face battles, and sometimes they aren't really all fought with guns and swords and things like that. Sometimes they're fought with words, and these days as Christians we are under attack, and it seems you can publicly praise any other religion. You can name, you can mention their God, Allah, Buddha, whoever it is, as long as you're talking favorably about them, you won't really hear anything about that. You won't be given any problems. But when you mention the name of Jesus, you're going to have problems. You're going to be attacked. And he is, as the Bible says, he is that stumbling block for people. And you know why? It's because there's power in that name. There is power in that name. And, all of these false religions, these false gods, and I say that little g gods, they know that, and they fear him. They know who he is, and they fear him, and they want to be like God. They want to be God, and so many do. There are just so many other religions, and so whether you know it or not, you are in a battle daily, and then there are other battles too, those that are fought within ourselves. So those are, they can be private battles of pain. It can be physical illness. It can be depression, finances, grief, worry, stress, frustration, loneliness, temptations. The list just goes on and on. Everyone could probably name that for themselves. Sometimes these problems can be so big and overwhelming to us, though, that we feel that there's just no way that we could ever defeat them, that we're defeated without even a fight. But we all face giant problems, at one time or another. We all have or are or will be facing some kind of a huge problem. So today we're going to look at how David defeated his giant, who was Goliath. Now, as Ruth Ann just read, he seemed to be just an enormous and intimidating enemy for the Israelite army. And again, they were defeated, and they hadn't even begun the battle. And sometimes we can feel like that too. But I think this is a great passage to look at because it's a battle of good versus evil. It's a life and death struggle between a young man who appeared to be weak. In human eyes, he appeared to be weak and helpless to others. And then there was this enormous, intimidating enemy, Goliath. So, it's a story of bravery. Even though the apparent inequalities and the disadvantages that David had to overcome. So, Goliath was over 9 feet tall, and David was just an ordinary-sized young man. He was just a young man, possibly still in his teens. So you can imagine, his size. Goliath's armor weighed more than David did. So just looking at this giant walking towards you would be intimidating, wouldn't it? Just a little. I think it would. He must have looked, invincible to the army, to the Israelite army. David, though, he carried a shepherd's staff. Just a shepherd's staff and a sling and some stones. He didn't have any body armor or spear. So by all human standards, this battle was over before it started. If you were looking at that, you would think, well, that guy's not in his right mind. But we would think that there's no way that David could win that battle, right? That's what we would think if we saw that. But what weapon did David have that Goliath didn't have? It's a very important weapon for our battles. Very important. He had God, and he had his strong faith in God. Like I said, by all human standards, but with God, all things are possible. Do we believe that? Do we really believe that? Our giants they can taunt us, they can intimidate us, just like Goliath did David and the army. They can discourage us so much that we don't even want to try to win. We just want to throw in the towel. We want to run, just run, hide from them, and see if they go away. They don't. But sometimes all we need to do, though, is take a stand and watch those giants just scurry away. I have a silly cat and a dog, and this cat, it thinks it's fearless. It thinks it's big and brave, and so it waits until dogs come out. The other dogs, they like, they're small. They like to play with it, but it'll just lay just out of sight, or just out of reach, if the dog's on a leash, it'll lay down in the gravel and roll around, like, you can't reach me, I'm not scared. But so then our boxer, though, she watches it. And one day, the cat did that, and she acted differently. She went after that cat. Good thing I had the leash. I don't think she would have hurt her, but boy, that cat took off. Took off in a hurry. But it just taunts and just like, oh, I'm doing this, you can't reach me. But that's, if you can picture that, though, that's kind of what Goliath was doing, and that's kind of what our giants do to us. It's how we respond. So. But what we need to do, we need to realize that our giants, they want to destroy us. They want to win, and they're going to try to convince us any way that they can so they can win. They want to tell us that we can't overcome all of our past failures or, the mistakes we've made in life and all these things that they can dredge up, that they just want us to believe that we're worthless and that we can't win. There's nothing we can do to change that. We just need to go away, sit down, and be quiet. We don't need to speak about the Lord. So that's what they want to convince us. But what's the one thing that David had that none of the others in the Israelite army had, including Saul? His attitude. He had a good attitude, didn't he? He didn't pay attention to what everyone else said. That's what we need to do. When the enemy is bullying us, and whispering those things to us, what do we need to do? What do we need then? We need an attitude adjustment. Has anyone ever had an attitude adjustment? Well, God can give us a swift kick sometimes, can't he? Yeah, give us an attitude adjustment. We need to refuse to be intimidated or discouraged, or because we know that the battle belongs to the Lord, and it isn't our battle. We're in it, but the battle belongs to the Lord, and he will fight for us. God will give us the victory. And so we don't need to try to fight in our own strength. So Goliath, he did his best to create this atmosphere of fear and intimidation. Up until the time that David arrived, it had been working on the others in the army. Verse 11 says that Saul and his army were dismayed and terrified. They all ran away in fear. So it had worked on them. They were relying on their own strength. David's brother, he even tried to discourage him. He rebuked him and questioned his motives and his integrity. And then King Saul, he tried to discourage him. He told him he was only a boy. There's no way you can do that. You can't go up against this Philistine. You're only a boy. He's been a warrior all his life. So David didn't listen to them, though. He didn't listen to them. He was focused on God and what God said. So anytime that we're faced with problems, a giant problem that we have, we should respond to it, with faith in God, like David did. There's always going to be people who try to discourage us. Negative Nellies, or whatever you want to call them. There's always going to be people that try to discourage us. And sometimes it's even our own family or friends. It can be. We hear, you're too old, you're too young, you're maybe not educated enough. That's a big one, I think. Not talented enough. Is it really our talent, though? It isn't our talent, is it? It's a gift that God gives us that we rely on. But words like that, though, they can make us question things, can't they? And they can just drain that will out of us if we let it, if we believe them. David, though, he remembered his past triumphs. Verse 36 said, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. So he knew that God would, God helped him before, and he knew that he would help him, again. He'd overcome those problems, and he would help him to overcome these problems as well. He knew God was faithful. And can anyone else say that? Do we know God is faithful? Amen. Sometimes when we're going through these giant problems, it may be harder to see God's hand at work in our lives, at work in those things that we're going through. But normally when we get through those things, it's much easier to look back and see, where he was at work. So when we feel alone and we begin to question God, if we can't feel his presence or his guidance, when we're in that battle, we just need to recall those past triumphs that he's brought us through, just like David did. His was the lion and the bear. We all have our own stories. But David convinced Saul to give him a chance. He wanted to try. Trying to be helpful, Saul, he even put on some of his own special armor, his battle armor on David, because he thought that would prepare him for battle. But David was much smaller than Saul was, so it was heavy and it just didn't fit. It was just going to be a hindrance to him, so it wasn't going to work for him. So, have you ever had other people, not necessarily Christian friends or family, offer solutions to your problems that just didn't fit? It just didn't fit. It just wasn't right for you. You ever had that? Well, I have, and the end result can be disastrous. Any solution that approaches a spiritual problem from a just purely human standpoint, it's going to be inadequate. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all solution unless it's God. So we need to remember that. But David knew that Saul's solution wasn't appropriate. He knew that wasn't going to work. So it was just a hindrance to him. So what it would have done was taken his focus off from God, because he'd been worried about trying to keep that in place, and how heavy it was. It would have weakened him. So when we're faced with the world's inadequate solutions, then we need to choose God's way too, the way of faith. We need to have faith in God. And David, he had very strong faith in God, didn't he? So we need to do that. In response to Goliath's bullying, his insults and his taunting, verses 45 through 47 says, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. That's pretty strong faith, don't you think? When you're facing that giant, it's just seems just insurmountable. But David's confidence, it isn't in his own ability, is it? He isn't depending on what his own ability. He's depending on God. All his confidence is in God. So Goliath, he moved closer to begin his attack, and David, he just placed that one smooth stone in his sling and slung it. I'm not sure how they do that, but he slung it at David's head, or at Goliath's head, and he made a perfect shot. He made a perfect shot. It hit him right in the forehead, about the only place on him that wasn't covered with some kind of armor. And it sunk into his forehead, and he slumped over on the ground dead. So it wasn't David's skill that won the battle that day. It wasn't his own ability. It was God's power. It wasn't the stone that made the difference. Could have been any stone. It was David's strong faith. Matthew 19:26. With God, all things are possible. As I said, we have to believe that. With God's help, David overcame that giant problem. With God's help, we can do the same thing. We can overcome those problems. Whatever those giants are in our lives, we can overcome them. We just have to believe. We have to have faith. We have to trust God. We need to refuse to be discouraged. Other people are telling us, we can't do it. We need to just ignore them. We need to push them away. We can't run from those giants or hide from them. We have to stand and face them. And because if we run, then we're allowing them to defeat us. We need to attack them as David did. So just like the cat, when you take a stand against them, they have a whole different reaction. Kind of throws them off. They don't know what to do because they didn't expect that. So they're not prepared for a battle against God. They weren't expecting that. They were just expecting us to try to fight, to respond in our own power. So we need to take a faith-filled stand. And if we remember God's faithfulness in our situations and the triumphs in the past that we've encountered, we have to reject solutions that leave God out. We always need God involved. We always need Him, center and our focus on Him. And because if we do, we know then that God gives the victory. So, of course, I don't know. Maybe no one is facing giants right now. But anyway, if you are, I think there's some tips that will help you respond differently. So, but at this time, we'll sing our closing hymn.